Hey guys, this is Illusion Podfics. We're going to be reading Chapter 2 of Riptide by Punk Rock Hades. You're being hypocritical, B. Nightwing sounded exasperated, but Jason would bet that Nightwing's annoyed expression had nothing on how harangued Batman was probably looking right now. It had been a solid couple of weeks since Jason had rescued his stupid not-brother from the warehouse, and the arguments over the comms had yet to subside. No, you're being naive, came the returning growl. It didn't help that Jason had sorta helped Dick twice more over the course of that time by shooting a couple of fuckers who tried to take wide open shots at Nightwing's back. At this point, someone needed to have a serious talk with Dick about his self-preservation instincts, or completely fucking lack thereof. Because the fact that Jason had to A, save his ass twice more, and B, Nightwing had then responded to a goddamn crime lord shooting the thugs who tried to kill him in the kneecaps by giving the criminal a jaunty little wave of thanks didn't bode well for his long-term survival. It's not naive when he's shown multiple times now that he can be relied on to help, Nightwing argued. Jason just wanted a peaceful night of patrol. Was that too much to ask? The bats had been going on long enough that he'd started getting a headache from all the goddamn arguing. He'd wound up sitting on the edge of the rooftop in Crime Alley, legs dangling over the side while he listened to his former family fight about him. He's a criminal, Nightwing, Batman gritted out, sounding truly annoyed. Jason could just picture him, looming on some ledge overlooking the city somewhere, the visible half of his face showing only the disapproving line of his lips. Guys? Robin interjected, but was promptly ignored. He's helping people, same as us. The only reason you still think of him as a criminal is because you don't like his methods, Nightwing shot back. That was nice. But also, Jason was definitely a criminal. He was all for sticking it to the bat, but call a spade a spade. Jason committed crimes, and he's not sorry about it. He did what he had to do to keep people safe. He runs the criminal underworld, Nightwing. Explain to me how that's helping people. Well, Jason didn't exactly do that, not anymore, but he was perfectly happy to let people keep thinking that. People were less likely to fuck with someone they thought was still a big-time crime boss. He doesn't, though, Nightwing argued, and Jason's eyebrows went up. I've been looking into it. Yeah, when the Red Hood first came to Gotham, he got a little more heavily involved in the criminal parts of it, but now he mostly just runs Crime Alley. He's got his fingers in the drug trade, but it seems to be more so that he can regulate it than because he wants to profit from it. He's instituted all these rules about who they're allowed to sell to and how much they're allowed to sell to one person at a time, and since he's been in charge, drug overdoses and underage drug charges had gone down in Park Row. What? How the hell had Dick found out all of that? Or actually, given that Nightwing probably had access to the Oracle's vast network of information, the better question was really why had Nightwing had them dig up all that information on him? That was some serious research, and an impressively spot-on analysis given that it wasn't like the Red Hood had a heart-to-heart with Nightwing about his motivations. So, what? You think he's using his criminal empire to try to stop crime? Batman asked, tone dry as the Sahara. Now that was the skepticism Jason had expected from the Bats, because what they refused to see was that the justice system they relied on so heavily didn't work. Their method of catching criminals to get them locked away wasn't doing shit. Given all the corruption in the police force and in the legal system, if the corrupt justice system was going to fail at every turn, then the best way to reduce crime was from within the criminal organizations themselves. Control the crime, rather than trying to eradicate it. It was the logic that Jason knew Bruce would never accept. Well, when you put it like that, Nightwing responded airily, though there was a slightly forbidding edge to his voice. Jason knew that tone. It was the tone Dick got when he was trying not to start a fight but was getting sick of B questioning him insistently. It had been a precursor to way too many fights at the manor, back when Jason had lived there. Nightwing. Guys, Robin interrupted again, but Nightwing wouldn't be deterred. B, come on! I know I'm right on this. Nightwing's tone had turned serious, and Jason's emotions were churning in his stomach. All of my instincts are telling me this guy is trying to help in his own way. He's just going about it more aggressively than us. There was a moment, and then the intensity lifted, and Nightwing chirped. He's like a Byronic hero. Excuse me? A Byronic hero. You know, the broody, rebellious type with the dark, tragic past who everyone thinks is a bad guy but really is just misunderstood. Nightwing elaborated, and Jason blinked. The conversation coming back to him from a million years ago, during one of Dick's rare visits to the manor when Jason first started living there. I can honestly say I did not know that. Batman deadpanned. Why is it that you know that? There was a sudden quiet over the comms, and then Nightwing said in a forcibly light tone, I guess Jason told me once, during one of his literature readings. The silence was deafening. Jason almost pulled out the comm to check and make sure it was still working, but he felt frozen, throat dry at the sound of his own name being spoken by someone he thought had all but forgotten him. No names on comms, came Batman's eventual response in a hard and final tone. Jason didn't know what to feel. Guys, really sorry to interrupt, but I could use a little help over here. Robin cut in, tone strained, and just like that, the tense moment passed. Batman and Nightwing were focused in on the newest little word. Robin, report, Batman commanded, and Jason could hear the concern in his voice. Nightwing chimed in worriedly a half-second later, with Oracle calling out the baby bird's location, a mere few blocks from where Jason was currently still frozen on a rooftop. They didn't need him. They may not have forgotten him like he'd thought they had, but they didn't need him. Batman and Nightwing could save this Robin without his help. The sound of gunfire ricocheted through the rooftops a few buildings over. Jason cursed and headed that way. There was something deeply wrong with Jason. That was what Jason had decided after the 4th time he saved one of the birds' lives. Once is a chance, 2 is a coincidence, 3 is a pattern, 4 times. 4 times mean that Jason has a fucking problem. But what the hell was he supposed to do when his idiot Knot brothers were so good at getting themselves into trouble? When Jason had dropped in, guns blazing on the baby bird being pinned down by a bunch of goons with guns, it had been the mental promise that this was the last time he would rescue one of the bats. And then he'd promptly broken that promise several nights later when Dickwing got himself captured by one of the trafficking rings he'd been tracking. Yeah, Jason hadn't minded taking those assholes down under Nightwing's watchful gaze. But the arguments on the comm were now Nightwing and Robin versus the ever-forbidding Batman, and it had been giving Jason a headache even before he made it worse by rescuing a Robin a second time. At this point, he was about to start charging them for his goddamn services. What was even worse was that other people had started to notice. The rumor that the Red Hood was working with the bats had turned the edges of Jason's vision a distinctly ominous green the first time he'd heard it, and it was ruining his reputation in the underworld. If it had just been Robin that Jason was saving, he probably could have passed it off as his protecting kids shtick. But Nightwing had to go and fuck it up for him as per usual. It had also unfortunately resulted in the rumor that a good way to divert the Red Hood's attention was by kidnapping one of the bats, which was what had led to tonight. Jason was breaking into another warehouse where Robin was tied to a chair with a bomb rigged off to go way too soon. There was a deal going on at the docks that the Lucky Hand Triad had apparently been trying to distract him from. Unfortunately for them, Oracle had already caught on their little operation, and Nightwing had been in the middle of breaking it up the last time Jason had paid attention on comms. Nightwing had been bantering with the Triad goons, and Jason had been about to head that way to help Reed break some kneecaps, when one of the Triad members had bragged to Nightwing about their brilliant idea of distracting Hood by kidnapping Robin, which had been news to Hood. Jason would just like to point out that it was very hard to distract Hood by kidnapping Robin if Hood didn't know about the goddamn kidnapping. Whatever. The Triad leaders were idiots. What else was new? It did mean that Jason was bursting into the warehouse hair-raisingly close to when the timer on the bomb was set to go off, cutting Robin free, sweeping him up, and grappling them both out with just a few seconds to spare. He landed on an open stretch of concrete between warehouses hard, as the building exploded behind him, going to a knee and instinctively curling Robin against his chest, shielding him from the burst of heat. The roiling heat passed quickly, and Jason looked down at the feathered light kid in his arms, eyes closed, but chest thankfully moving up and down rhythmically, and putting Jason's worst fears to rest. "Kid?" Jason called gruffly. He shifted Robin's weight to one arm so he could poke the too tiny vigilante in the cheek. Robin scrunched up his nose and made a grumbling noise, and Jason poked him again. "Come on, baby bird. Wakey, wakey. You gotta let me know you're all right." "I'm fine. Just give me a sedative," Robin murmured, then swatted at Jason's hand when he poked him in the cheek again, annoyed. 5 more minutes," the kid whined. Jason rolled his eyes, even as relief filled them. A prickle on the back of his neck had him scooping Robin back up and spinning to see Batman landing a few feet away. Batman, who was looking at them with an expression that had Jason freezing. Because Batman was eyeing Jason and Robin with something akin to fear, and that was an expression he hadn't known Batman was capable of making. Jason's mind was spinning, wondering what would have put that expression on his former mentor's face, and he found all the smart-ass comments he'd usually make drying up on his tongue. Had there been a fear toxin released that Jason hadn't heard about? What else would make B looking at them like that? It was just an explosion. Oh, it hit Jason then, what Batman was seeing. The explosion, the smoking ruins of a warehouse, the unmoving body of a Robin lying limply in his arms. "Kid's fine," Jason finally blurted, thankful that the voice modulator on the helmet made the words come out curt. Batman didn't say a word, just stared at them. At Robin, really. He was watching the rise and fall of his chest, if Jason had to guess, as if he was expecting that at any moment those breaths would stop, like the last Robin's had. Abruptly, Jason couldn't fucking stand it. He strode forward, steps jerky, and thrust the baby bird at the bat, who took him wordlessly. Batman looked down at the living, breathing Robin in his arms, like he wasn't sure the boy was really there. And Jason didn't want to read the expression on his face. His own face felt hot and prickly, and some emotion he refused to name was crawling under his skin. He backed away a step as Batman's gaze snapped to him, gauntleted hand holding Robin's body more tightly, tugging him towards safety. Jason's eyes followed the movement, and he swallowed. "Would it kill you to show up on time?" he finally asked, snapping back to meet those unfathomable eyes hidden behind the mask. And then he fled. The comms were more subdued for a few days after that, with Robin benched from patrol and everyone else too busy fighting off memories to fight on the comms. Jason had decided to deal with the unwanted emotions by throwing himself into actual fights, certain that if he stopped moving far too long, his past would catch up and bury him in flashbacks. He stuck to his side of the city, though, not wanting to risk running into Batman or Nightwing during their patrols, as he threw himself in the path of whatever danger he could find. Muggers, gang fights, arm deals. Gotham had no shortage of crime, and Jason would take anything if it would stave off the memories of Bruce's expression in silence, the little voice in the back of his head that quietly wondered if that terrified devastation had been on Bruce's face when he'd found Jason's body. It hadn't been, right? Jason knew better than to imagine he'd mattered enough to Bruce for that. Bruce had replaced him so quickly after that. Not that it mattered, because Jason had chosen his path, separate from the Bats, and he wasn't going back. It was better this way. He knew that. He'd known that since he came back from the dead and Talia shoved a newspaper bearing the headline "Batman and Robin returned the Joker to Arkham" into his hands and showed him nothing had changed. Nothing had changed, and his spot had been so cleanly filled. As if he'd never existed in the first place. There was nothing for him to go back to. He'd long since accepted that. Just, why did the thought leave a hollow feeling now? Honestly, Jason was even surprised he could feel hollow. He was so accustomed to the pits of rage filling any void it could find, the sensation was intensely jarring, and for some reason, the adrenaline from the fights wasn't helping as much as Jason had hoped. Not that that stopped Jason from continuing to try, possibly long past the point after which he should have stopped. Because after 4 days of throwing himself into any fight he could find, after the countless bruises and shallow wounds he gotten as a result, after the constant adrenaline paired with the lack of sleep and resulting exhaustion, Jason might not have been in his peak fighting condition, which he might be paying for, after picking a fight with a group of armed gang members. In his defense, they'd had a woman cornered, and they were making some god-awful claims about their fucking plans with her. So what exactly had he been supposed to do? Jumping into the middle of them and throwing punches may have been a too hasty answer upon reflection. The breath whooshed out of him when one of them landed a hit on his abdomen, and he absorbed the blow, ignoring the way it twinged the bullet in his calf as he struck with a kick on his own, knocking the attacker back enough to get a few much-needed inches of breathing room. Unfortunately for him, the gang had numbers on their side and pressed their advantage. Jason was rapidly reaching the conclusion that he was capital F fucked, when, of all things, the goddamn Batman dropped in. The fight went pretty quickly after that, with the gang members lying unconscious on the ground until it was just Jason and Batman left upright, with Jason staring at the motionless Batman and waiting for Mr. I Am Vengeance to attack the last murderer standing. The young woman he dropped in to save had scampered away after the gang members were down, and normally Jason would shadow her to make sure she got home okay, but tonight he couldn't quite muster the energy. And even if he could have, there was Batman to contend with. He knew he should be fighting for his freedom right now, but Christ, he was so fucking tired, and he had no illusions about his ability to beat the Bat, or even outrun him in his current condition. But Batman wasn't attacking. "What are you waiting for?" Jason asked eventually. Batman appeared to be eyeing him critically, and Jason resisted the urge to hunch in on himself defensively. He knew he looked like shit, and having those analytical eyes scanning him was making him only more aware of the still bleeding injuries and the exhausted slump to his shoulders. "You shouldn't be out like this," Bruce responded in his characteristic growl, and Jason's brow furrowed in confusion. "What?" "Oracle has been keeping track of your behavior the past few nights. You're in no condition to be out tonight, even if half of the reports are true. Go home." Jason blinked. "You're letting me go?" he said, the statement coming out almost a question with the force of his bewilderment. The Bat remained silent, but he made no move to try and arrest Jason, which Jason supposed was as close to confirmation he was going to get. "But I kill people." He wanted to take those words back as soon as they escaped. It wasn't like he wanted to be dragged off to prison, and he knew better than to give Batman reasons to arrest him. But give him a break. His brain wasn't exactly firing on all cylinders at the moment. Batman just stared at him evenly, then glanced down at the unconscious men at their feet, then back up to Jason. "Not tonight, you haven't." "Or at all, since Nightwing made his offer." "Wait, that couldn't be right. Could it?" Jason racked his brain, alarmed, but couldn't think of a single person he'd killed since the first time he'd rescued his stupid not brother. That's a coincidence," he protested weakly. "I assumed as much," Batman responded. "Still, after your actions with Robin, it would be poor form to arrest you right now." Jason stared at him dumbly. "Right," Batman sighed. "Go home. You shouldn't have been out tonight in the first place." Jason made a noise of protest. There was a girl. They'd have hurt her. What was I supposed to do, leave them to it? He asked, aware of his words were jumbled and his tone painfully close to a whine, but unable to muster enough energy to be embarrassed. "I'm not sure how you getting yourself killed was of any assistance to that girl," Batman said dryly. And Jason resisted the urge to shrink before that tone. It was the same one Bruce had used on him when he'd done something stupid as Robin. "You should know when to call for backup." Jason snorted before he could stop himself. "Backup? Right. Who am I supposed to call exactly? Black Mask?" "Not sure he'd be all that willing to lend a hand," he said sardonically, and the Batman frown of disapproval deepened. "You go out at night without backup?" Jason must have a death sentence, or while imprisonment wish, because the question had him bristling. "Like you've never done that before," he shot back. Batman didn't rise to his ire, and I learned that it was unwise to do so. Jason deflected. "Well, I don't have a whole lot of other choices," he said, knowing the exhaustion was clear even in his modulated voice. Batman was quiet for a moment, contemplative in a way that made Jason's skin itch. "How's the kid?" Jason asked, partially to change the subject, and partially because there was a little part of him that he couldn't squash that was worried. "Robin will make a full recovery," Batman answered, and Jason knew how carefully the paranoid man modulated his tone. But he didn't think he was imagining the relief that he heard. There was a pause, and then Batman said, "Thank you for saving him." If Jason was feeling better, He'd have probably railed against the guy for not saving Robin himself, for being too late again. As it was, he just shrugged and said, "Seemed like the right thing to do." Came the oh-so-eloquent response. "Go home." "Yeah," Jason sighed. "Okay." He went home. It didn't take long for the embarrassment to kick in. In fact, it took precisely one 18-hour sleep fest, and then Jason's much more well-rested brain promptly tormenting him with every mortifying part of the night, for being rescued like some sort of damsel in distress, like some sort of Robin, to being chided for going out while tired and injured, to being told that Oracle had been keeping an eye on his behavior. Also, that Batman had let him go at all was baffling, but the way he'd scolded Jason and sent him home like Jason was a misbehaving child was just... Jason needed some time to process the absolute fuckery of it. What the hell was happening in Bruce's head? Luckily, his brooding gargoyle was the most peaceful place in the city. It was where he went when he wanted absolute peace and serenity, a moment to be alone with his thoughts and avoid the woes of the world. It was one of the few places left that Jason could count on to be a locus of solitude and isolation, and he treasured his oasis of tranquility. Hood. Fuck! Jason yelped, jumping a foot in the air before managing to somehow stick the landing on the rooftop ledge by the gargoyle. He spun around to face the one person he wanted to see the least, looming a few steps behind on the roof. "Batman? What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded. "Christ, make a noise or something, warn a guy." Really, it was Jason's own fault. He should have been paying better attention. He'd been so caught up in his own thoughts that he didn't even notice someone sneaking up on him, though Bruce's approach had always been tough to pick up, even on a good day, back when he was Robin. Still, his elite training should have been enough to register it. Jason just hadn't been expecting anybody to come to his gargoyle. He glared at Batman, an expression lost under the helmet, but the Gotham's dark night looked surprisingly awkward anyway. "I visit here sometimes," he growled out haltingly, and Jason blinked before registering that Batman was answering his question. "Visit?" he asked, the strange word choice sticking out. This was a favorite spot of someone I once knew. I come here sometimes, when he's on my mind." Oh. Oh God. Was Bruce talking about him? He could still remember with aching clarity the last time he and Bruce had been up here, in this exact spot, when Bruce had snuck up on him and Jason had demanded how he'd found him. Even under the cowl, Jason had been able to tell that Bruce was amused when he said, "You're the only kid I've ever met who has a favorite gargoyle." Jason had scowled at him, annoyed that Bruce scrutinized his habits that closely, but also secretly touched that he cared enough to notice. "Seems like an odd place for someone to like so much," Jason heard himself comment as if from a distance. Bruce hummed, gazing out over the city lights spread below. He said it was a good place to get away from everyone, but still keep an eye on the city. Jason had said that. I think he just likes the dramatic edge that being up here gave him. "Well, that was just unfair. You're criticizing someone for having a dramatic flair?" Jason asked incredulously, eyeing the big black fursuit of doom. Batman inclined his head as if to say, "Touché." A semi-easy silence fell between them for a moment as they eyed each other. "You remind me of him," Bruce said suddenly. There was something stuck in Jason's throat. "What?" he forced out, glad the helmet modulator disguised his choked voice. You remind me of him sometimes." The Dark Knight looked away, inscrutable gaze searching out over the city. He was reckless, too. Before Jason could even think to formulate a response to that, Batman had aimed his grappler, but he paused before swinging away. "Here," he said, throwing something small and round at Jason, who caught it on reflex and glanced down at the comm unit, now resting innocuously in his glove. Nightwing and Robin had been advocating for this for weeks, and, well, I'm not unaware of the debt we owe you for the number of times you've assisted them, and after how I found you last time, if you need help, use that to call for us." And without giving Jason the chance to respond, to throw it back at him, to insist that he doesn't need the Bat's help, to grind it to dust under his boots, to accept it and thank him, he swung off, leaving Jason staring over the city with the little device that could officially connect him to his old life resting in the palm of his hand. Alright guys, and that is the end of Riptide Chapter 2. I'll see you in the next chapter.